Hello everyone, what is up? Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, I'm Maddie. I run EdTech Classroom, the blog, podcast, and of course YouTube channel. Today is Vlogmas Day 14. Now if you aren't familiar with Vlogmas, it's something that a bunch of YouTubers do where we post a new video every single day in December up until Christmas. So like I said, today is Vlogmas Day 14, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about design thinking in the elementary school classroom. So without further ado, let's get started. Design thinking is a creative problem-solving approach that consists of 5 key stages: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. Many organizations use design thinking to innovate. Organizations all across the world use this process to spark innovation in the workplace. IDEO is often credited with coining the term design thinking. IDEO is a consulting and design firm, but other organizations as well use design thinking in the workplace every single day. Much like how design thinking is used in companies and organizations, design thinking is also used in the classroom. We know this, but teachers are so creative, and design thinking has proven to have many benefits as well as drawbacks in the elementary school classroom. So now let's talk about some of these possible benefits and drawbacks of the design thinking process. By the way, I have written about design thinking on my blog a ton. It is a topic that I am particularly passionate about as an educator. So if you are looking for an in-depth breakdown of the gift giving project, which is the project I'm sharing in today's video, or of the design thinking process in general, I will have a very detailed blog post linked in the video description down below for you guys to check out if you are interested in learning even more about implementing this process in your classroom. Design thinking involves communicating and defining a problem. Oftentimes, design thinking requires students to conduct interviews and practice empathy, which are skills that sometimes can be difficult for young children. So design thinking, of course, as we have already addressed, is a problem-solving approach that helps students practice their creativity. And then, of course, design thinking can teach children how to understand others, how to understand the needs of others, and how to make sense of their own place in the world as well. So those are some of the benefits of the design thinking process. Of course, with every approach in the classroom, there are also going to be some drawbacks. So despite these possible benefits, there are some drawbacks that do come to mind when implementing design thinking in the classroom. So the first drawback that I think of with design thinking in the classroom is that many teachers, especially in progressive education, often note how they're asked to follow a new perspective or a new tool or a new approach every few years. So if design thinking is hot right now, it'll be inquiry-based learning next, and so on. So oftentimes people say that there are too many perspectives or tools or approaches to be following, and that's something that I know has been true in my experience as an educator as well. Additionally, the reality is that it can also be difficult to keep track and keep up. If teachers aren't trained and provided proper support, it can also be tricky to implement design thinking in the classroom, especially with our youngest learners. And then lastly, for teachers who are excited and eager to explore design thinking, there might be some resistance from schools. Design thinking is sometimes considered non-traditional, which provides a setback for teachers who don't have the resources or the flexibility in their curriculum. So now I want to share an example of an in-depth project that you can try out with your elementary students. This project I have adapted from the Stanford D School. The Stanford Design School, or the D School, is one of the pioneers behind the design thinking process, much like IDEO, and they have a list of project examples on their website for you guys to check out and try out in your classroom. Like I said, this is going to be an adaptation of the gift giving project from the Stanford D School. Our essential question for the gift giving project is, how might we design a useful and meaningful gift for a family member? Now, because design thinking consists of 5 key stages: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test, students would discover an answer to that essential question or try to come up with a solution to the problem by using this 5-step problem-solving approach. So first, we'd focus on stage number 1, empathize. In my opinion, this empathy stage is probably the most unique part of the design thinking process and is really what sets it apart from other problem-solving approaches out there. Design thinking is very human-centered, and I love that this empathy stage really focuses on identifying the needs of the user or the person that you are designing your solution for. So I really like that empathy is the very first stage of this process. It really helps students be able to identify and discover the needs of others. Empathy is also a great social emotional skill that elementary school teachers are always trying to teach in their classrooms. You might want to begin this stage of the gift-giving project by having a conversation about the word empathy. What does empathy mean? Why is it important? Questions like that are going to be really helpful for students to actually understand what the goal of this first stage is. Then, once you've come to a class definition and understanding of the term empathy, it's time to move on to our interviews. So typically, I recommend that teachers do this project where students are designing meaningful gifts for each other. So you have student pairs and they work together to come up with solutions for each other. So for example, student A would come up with a meaningful gift for student B, and student B would come up with a meaningful gift for student A. This is personally a structure that I really like and I tend to recommend to elementary school teachers, but there are lots of other ways that you could do this project as well. So for this empathy stage, you would want students to actually conduct interviews to find out the needs, wants, and interests of their partner. So student A would want to interview student B to find out some more information about them. What do they think is really meaningful? What's important to them? What matters to them? What would be useful for them, right? So that's getting back to that essential question of what's meaningful and what's useful. So what would be really useful for their partner? What do they need? What do they wish they had? Those are the types of questions that students can be asking in this interview stage. Now, depending on what grade level you teach, I would probably recommend modeling the interviewing process for students and also giving them perhaps a list of potential questions that they could ask their partner. Once student A has finished interviewing student B, then student B can begin interviewing student A. Now it's time to move on to the define stage. So students have completed their empathy interviews. They've started to learn a little bit about what their partner is interested in, what their partner might need, what they find meaningful, what they find useful, and now we can actually write a needs statement. So a needs statement is something that is very much key to the design thinking process, because design thinking is always about creating a solution for someone else, trying to solve some sort of problem. And so it's really important to create a needs statement and to define the problem so that as you continue to go throughout the rest of the design thinking process, you're able to refer back to that defining the problem stage or that needs statement to really make sure that you're meeting the needs of the user or your partner that you're working with. This stage I find can be particularly tricky for elementary students because students oftentimes get so excited after their interviews that they want to just go ahead and start building immediately, but it's really important that they take that time to identify the problem, to identify the needs of their partner. Again, like I said, it can be a little bit tricky, so you might want to model what this looks like for students. Here's an example of a potential needs statement that you might write on the board for your students. You can use this as a sentence stem. So you might start off by saying something like, my partner needs help with blank. I know this because blank. Or you might write something like, my partner feels appreciated when blank because blank. Or lastly, my partner needs help with blank because blank. So those are 3 examples that are all pretty similar, but they're getting at that same idea of identifying a need or a problem, or really making sure that you're empathizing with your partner and have a reason why. With those interviews, it's important to remind students to dig deeply, to always try to figure out why students are saying what they're saying, why your partner has those needs, why your partner has those interests. So now, once you've written a needs statement and you've defined the problem or defined the need, it's time to move on to the next stage, which is the ideate stage. Ideate is all about thinking outside of the box. The term ideate basically just means brainstorming a bunch of ideas. With this ideate stage, I typically like to recommend that students brainstorm 3 to 5 different ideas before they begin moving on to the prototyping stage. Now, you might notice with your elementary students, this is something that I've noticed in my experience as a teacher. Students oftentimes have one idea that they absolutely love and they just want to run with it. Now, ideating is really important. It's so important for students to be able to stretch themselves and to try to come up with at least 3 to 5 different ideas. Now, many organizations, when you see this ideate stage, you might associate it with that sticky note style brainstorming that's so well known with design thinking, where people are trying to come up with as many wildly radical ideas as possible. With elementary school students, it can be difficult to come up with that many ideas that quickly. So that's why I typically recommend you use about 3 to 5 you come up with about 3 to 5 different ideas. That tends to be sort of the sweet spot I've noticed in my experience teaching. So like I said, with these projects with elementary students, I typically recommend that they come up with 3 to 5 different ideas. So I like to have students on a piece of paper draw those 3 to 5 different ideas, be really detailed, add labels, create diagrams, really try to fully flesh out 3 to 5 different ideas. Depending on how long you are spending on this project, you might want to spend 15 minutes on this ideate stage, or you might want to spend much longer. It's kind of up to you. But with this ideate stage, it's really important to continue to remind students to refer back to that need statement. I have often noticed a pattern with especially early elementary students where they get so excited about these big ideas that they have that they start designing something for themselves rather than for their partner. So with this stage, I would highly recommend that you really emphasize to students that they're designing a meaningful and useful gift for someone else, not for themselves, to be sure to refer back to their needs statement and make sure that they're designing something that their partner would really love. Once students have come up with their 3 to 5 different ideas in the ideate stage, it's time for them to start prototyping. So prototyping can take form in a bunch of different ways. With this gift giving project specifically, I like to have students actually build something to give to their partners. So prototyping, typically in many elementary classrooms, especially STEM classrooms, looks like making things using recyclable materials. So think cardboard, paper towel tubes, all those types of great recyclable materials that students love to build with. Now, I've also seen students use different ed tech tools for this stage. So maybe you might want to use a 3D modeling software like Tinkercad. Maybe you might use an ed tech tool like Stop Motion Movie to make a short film. But with this project specifically, I really like to have students prototype using physical materials. Now again, with a different project, there might be other ways or other strategies that might make more sense. At the end of the day, it's up to you, but that's the strategy that's worked well for me. So students typically spend the bulk of their time prototyping. Now, when they're creating their prototypes, I forgot to mention, it's important for them to actually choose one of their favorite ideas that they created during that ideate stage. Maybe they'll show that to their partner. They'll show them the 3 to 5 different ideas that they came up with, and they'll ask for feedback. Maybe they'll ask their partner which one they like the most, and that's the one that they'll choose to build. Ideating is often about, or design thinking, is often about iterating and going back and asking for feedback and changing your ideas. And so it's great to continue to check in with your partner throughout this process to get that feedback. Typically then, students will spend the bulk of their time during the design thinking process on the prototyping stage. Students oftentimes get so excited by building. This really tends to be the most popular stage I've noticed with elementary students. Then lastly, it's time to move on to the testing stage. While testing is technically the final stage of the design thinking process, it's important to note that design thinking is iterative. The process is never really over. But in our classroom, the project will have a final end time or an end date. So testing is all about checking to see if your prototype works. In the instance of the gift giving project, testing means that you actually give your design to your partner. You ask them for feedback. You ask them if there's anything you should change. This is a really great opportunity for students to practice giving each other constructive feedback. I personally like to model what this looks like for students, and I also recommend that teachers use that I like and I wonder language with students to give feedback to each other. It tends to create a really constructive environment where students are able to take that feedback, refine their prototypes, and then give them as a final gift to their partner. Design thinking is a really wonderful approach to incorporate into your classroom. There's so many great ways that you can align design thinking to your curriculum. There's so many really wonderful opportunities for students to actually be solving real world problems. Design thinking is a super authentic problem-solving approach that students can really use to practice those 21st century skills. And again, it also can be aligned to curriculum, so it gives students examples for how they can actually implement their thinking and their learning in the real world. So thank you so much for watching today's video all about design thinking in the elementary school classroom. If you liked this video, be sure to give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you're not already. I post weekly tech tutorials for teachers, and during Vlogmas, I'm posting a new video every single day in December up until Christmas. So I'll see you back here tomorrow. Bye, friends.